Don Quixote, English. John Ormsby translation. 1885, public domain. Chapter 1, full text. Chapter 1. Which treats of the character and pursuits of the famous gentleman, Don Quixote of La Mancha. In a village of La Mancha, the name of which I have no desire to call to mind, there lived not long since one of those gentlemen that keep a lance in the lance-rack. An old buckler, a lean hack, and a greyhound for coursing. An olla of rather more beef than mutton, a salad on most nights, scraps on Saturdays, lentils on Fridays, and a pigeon or so extra on Sundays, made away with 3/4 of his income. The rest of it went in a doublet of fine cloth and velvet breeches and shoes to match for holidays. While on weekdays he made a brave figure in his best homespun. He had in his house a housekeeper past 40, a niece under 20, and a lad for the field and marketplace, who used to saddle the hack as well as handle the bill-hook. The age of this gentleman of ours was bordering on 50. He was of a hardy habit, spare, gaunt-featured, very early riser, and a great sportsman. They will have it his surname was Quixote or Casada. For here there is some difference of opinion among the authors who write on the subject, although from reasonable conjectures it seems plain that he was called Quixana. This, however, is of but little importance to our tale. It will be enough not to stray a hair's breadth from the truth in the telling of it. You must know, then, that the above-named gentleman, whenever he was at leisure, which was mostly all the year round, gave himself up to reading books of chivalry with such ardor and avidity that he almost entirely neglected the pursuit of his field sports, and even the management of his property. And to such a pitch did his eagerness and infatuation go, that he sold many an acre of tillage land to buy books of chivalry to read, and brought home as many of them as he could get. Of these there were none he liked so well as those of the famous Feliciano de Silva, for their lucidity of style and complicated conceits were as pearls in his sight, particularly when in his reading he came upon courtships and cartels, where he often found passages like, "The reason of the unreason with which my reason is afflicted so weakens my reason that with reason I murmur at your beauty." Or again, "The high heavens, that of your divinity, divinely fortify you with the stars. Render you deserving of the desert your greatness deserves." With these and the like expressions he lost his wits, and used to lie awake striving to understand them and wring out the meaning, which Aristotle himself could not have made out or extracted had he come to life again for that special purpose. He was not at all easy about the wounds which Don Bellianus gave and took, because it seemed to him that, great as were the surgeons who had cured him, he must have had his face and body covered all over with seams and scars. He commended, however, the author's way of ending his book with the promise of that interminable adventure, and many a time was he tempted to take up his pen and finish it properly as is there proposed, which no doubt he would have done, and made a successful piece of work of it too, had not greater and more absorbing thoughts prevented him. Many an argument did he have with the curate of his village, a learned man and a graduate of Siguenza, as to which had been the better knight, Palmerin of England or Amadis of Gaul. Master Nicholas, The village barber, however, used to say that neither of them came up to the Knight of Phoebus, and that if there was any that could compare with him, it was Don Galaor, the brother of Amadis of Gaul, because he had a spirit that was equal to every occasion, and was not a finical knight, nor lachrymose like his brother, while in the matter of valor he was not a whit behind him. In short, he became so absorbed in his books that he spent his nights from sunset to sunrise, and his days from dawn to dark in reading, and so from little sleep and much reading his brain dried up, and he went completely out of his mind. His fancy grew full of what he used to read about in his books. Enchantments, quarrels, battles, challenges, wounds, wooings, loves, agonies, and all sorts of impossible nonsense. And it so possessed his mind that the whole fabric of invention and fancy he read of was true. To him, there was no history more certain in the world. He knew the minutest details of every one of these books. He knew who was the son of such a king, and who was the father of such a giant, and who was the page of such a knight, and who was the squire of such another, and all the genealogies, friendships, alliances, loves, quarrels, and enmities that existed between them. He could tell you who was the lady that was enamored of such a knight, and who was the damsel that had been betrayed by such another, and in what country this adventure happened, and in what castle that other one, and who was the one that had killed such a giant, and who was the one that had been enchanted, and who had been delivered from enchantment. In short, he was so far gone in this reading that he had got it into his head that the whole of this chivalry was true, and that it was the best and truest history in the world. He said the Cid Ruy Diaz was a very good knight, but not to be compared with the Knight of the Burning Sword, who with one backstroke cut in half two fierce and monstrous giants. He thought more of Bernardo del Carpio, because at Roncesvalles he slew Roland the Enchanted, by availing himself of the artifice of Hercules, when he strangled Antaeus the son of Terra in his arms. He approved highly of the giant Morgante, because, although he was of the giant brood, which is always arrogant and ill-conditioned, he alone was affable and well-bred. But, above all, he admired Reinaldos of Montalban, especially when he saw him sallying forth from his castle and robbing everybody he met, and when beyond seas he stole that idol of Mahomet that was all of gold, as his history says. To have a bout of kicking at that traitor of a Ganelon, he would have given his housekeeper and his niece into the bargain. In conclusion, from little sleep and much reading, his brain dried up and he went completely out of his mind. He filled his fancy with everything that he read in his books, and with all that he imagined, and it so possessed his mind that the whole fabric of invention and fancy he read of was true. And he so possessed his mind that he resolved to become a knight-errant, and roam through the world with his arms and horse, in quest of adventures, and to practice in his own person all that he had read of being practiced by knights-errant. He was to right every kind of wrong, and expose himself to peril and danger, from which, in the event of his coming off victor, he was to win eternal renown and fame. Already the poor man saw himself crowned by the might of his arm Emperor of Trebizond at least. And so, led away by the intense enjoyment he found in these pleasant fancies, he set himself to put in execution the scheme he had formed. The first thing he did was to clean up some armor that had belonged to his great-grandfather, which, being very rusty and moldy, lay forgotten in a corner. He scoured and polished it as best he could, but he discovered a great defect in it, that it had no helmet with a complete visor, but only a morion. This deficiency, however, his ingenuity supplied, for he contrived a kind of half-helmet of pasteboard, which, fitted onto the morion, made the semblance of a complete helmet. It is true that, in order to see if it was strong and fit for service, he took his sword and gave it 2 slashes, the first of which undid in an instant what had taken him a week to do. The ease with which he had knocked it to pieces disturbed him a good deal, and to guard against the danger he set to work again, fixing bars of iron on the inside, until he was satisfied with its strength, and then, not caring to try any more experiments with it, he passed it and adopted it as a helmet of the most perfect construction. He next proceeded to ascertain the condition of his hack, and though he had more quarters than a reel of 8, and more cracks than the shoes of a greedy and ill-shod vintner, still, as he thought, the slighted of Alexander's Bucephalus or the Cid's Babieca was nothing to him. 4 days were spent in thinking what name to give him, because, as he said to himself, it was not right that a knight's horse, and so famous a knight's horse too, should be without a name of its own. He strove to give it a name that should declare what it had been before it belonged to a knight-errant, and what it was then. For it was only reasonable that its master, taking a new character, it should take a new name, and one that was illustrious and full of sound, as became the new order and calling he was about to follow. And so, after many names that he formed, erased and rejected, added to, took away from, and made again in his memory and imagination, he at last hit upon the name of Rocinante, a name, in his opinion, high-sounding and significant of what he had been when he was a common hack, before he belonged to a knight, being now the first of all hacks in the world, and the pride of his race. Having got a name for his horse so much to his taste, he wanted one for himself. And he was 8 days more in thinking of this, till at last he made up his mind to call himself Don Quixote, whence, as has been already said, the authors of this veracious history have inferred that his name must have been beyond a doubt Quixada, and not Quisada, as others would have it. But remembering that the valiant Amadis was not content to call himself simply Amadis, without adding the name of his kingdom and country, to make it famous and fill it with renown, he determined to do like him, and call himself Don Quixote of La Mancha, by which he thought he clearly described his origin and country, and did honor to it in taking his surname from it. Now that he had got his armor scoured, his morion turned into a helmet, his hack christened, and himself confirmed. He came to the conclusion that nothing more was needed, but to look for a lady to love. For a knight-errant without love was a tree without leaves and fruit, a body without a soul. And so he said to himself, if I, by good fortune, or rather by the favor of heaven, which I am endeavoring to deserve, shall encounter some giant hereabouts, as knights-errant generally do, and shall overthrow him with one encounter, or cleave him asunder down the middle of the waist, or in short, vanquish and subdue him, will it not be well to have someone to whom I may send him as a present, that he may enter and fall on his knees before my sweet lady, and in a humble and submissive voice say, I am the giant Caraculiambro, lord of the island of Malandrania, whom the never sufficiently praised knight Don Quixote of La Mancha has vanquished in single combat, and has commanded me to present myself before your grace, that your highness may dispose of me at your pleasure. Oh, how he enjoyed this fancy! Oh, how delighted he was with having discovered a lady to love. There was, so the story goes, in a village near his own, a very good-looking farm wench, with whom he had been in love at one time, though, as far as is known, she never knew it, nor gave a thought to the matter. Her name was Aldonza Lorenzo, and upon her he thought fit to confer the title of Lady of his Thoughts. And after some time spent in considering what name he should give her, for it was not right that she should retain the name of a common peasant, he resolved to call her Dulcinea del Toboso, because she was a native of El Toboso, a name to his mind, musical and uncommon, and significant, like all those he had already bestowed upon himself and the things belonging to him. End of Chapter 1. Expert Explanation. Chapter 1. Deep Commentary. Don Quixote of La Mancha, Cervantes. Chapter 1 is one of the most influential openings in world literature because it does two things at once. It creates a comic character, and it creates a modern psychological portrait. Cervantes does not introduce Don Quixote as a mythical hero or as a tragic madman. He introduces him as a perfectly ordinary provincial gentleman, a hidalgo, living on limited means. This detail is crucial. The book is not about a prince or a warrior. It is about a small man in a small place who dreams of greatness. One, the hidalgo, a social class in decline. The opening inventory: lance, old shield, thin horse, greyhound, simple meals, functions like a social X-ray. Cervantes is showing the reality of rural Spain: modest wealth, fading nobility, and economic fragility. A hidalgo had honor, but not necessarily money. This is a key tension in early modern Spain. Many people inherited the idea of noble identity, but lacked the material power to support it. So Don Quixote's madness is not random. It is connected to a historical situation, a society where traditional ideals of honor and heroism no longer match everyday life. In this sense, Don Quixote is not only a character, he is the symptom of an age. 2. Cervantes' realism, why the food list matters. Modern readers sometimes think the food and clothing details are slow. But in Cervantes, they are essential. They establish the tone of truth. This is not a legendary past. It is a recognizable, material, almost documentary present. Then Cervantes inserts the absurd, the chivalric imagination. Comedy is born from contrast. The more realistic the ground is, the more ridiculous the fantasy becomes. This is one reason Don Quixote is often considered the first modern novel. It does not float in myth. It stands in reality and then shows how the mind tries to escape it. Three, reading as transformation and danger. The chapter's main engine is reading. Don Quixote reads so intensely that books replace the world. Cervantes is exploring a new cultural phenomenon, mass popularity of printed fiction. For the first time, stories circulate widely and shape how people imagine life. Don Quixote becomes addicted to narrative. He starts interpreting reality through literary formulas, giants, enchanters, heroic quests, noble ladies. This is not simply stupidity. It is a powerful idea. The mind can be colonized by stories. Cervantes is asking, what happens when a human being confuses literature with life? 4. The satire is real, but the character is not mocked cheaply. Cervantes is attacking bad books of chivalry. He even quotes their ridiculous, self-important language. But notice something important. Cervantes does not hate Don Quixote. He builds him with dignity. Don Quixote's madness contains a moral impulse. He wants to right wrongs, defend the weak, and win honor through courage. So the satire is double. It laughs at delusion, but it also reveals the poverty of a world without ideals. The reader is invited to laugh, yet also to feel admiration. This emotional ambiguity is central to the book's greatness. 5. The invention of identity, naming as self-creation. One of the deepest themes begins in Chapter 1, naming. He renames his horse, Rocinante. He renames himself, Don Quixote of La Mancha. He renames Aldonza Lorenzo, Dulcinea del Toboso. This is not decorative. It is philosophical. By renaming, he creates a new world. He turns ordinary reality into symbolic reality. This is how literature works. It transforms things through meaning. Don Quixote is, in a sense, an artist of his own life. He rewrites existence. That is why modern critics often say, Don Quixote is not only insane, he is radically imaginative. Dulcinea, the ideal as a necessary fiction. Dulcinea is introduced as a peasant woman who does not even know she is loved. But Don Quixote needs her. In chivalric tradition, the lady is the source of purpose. But Cervantes turns it into something deeper. Dulcinea becomes the embodiment of the ideal. She is not a real romantic relationship. She is a spiritual engine. Don Quixote's love is not about possession. It is about meaning. This anticipates a central conflict of the novel, the tension between the ideal, Dulcinea, and the real world, Aldonza. Seven, the deeper tragedy behind the comedy. The chapter ends with the famous phrase, "His brain dried up and he went completely out of his mind." On the surface, it is funny. But underneath, it is sad. A lonely man, in a stagnant social environment, finds in books the intensity and grandeur he cannot find in life. So he chooses to become someone else. He chooses the dream over the ordinary. This is why Don Quixote has survived for centuries. He represents a universal human conflict. We all live between what is and what should be. Don Quixote refuses to surrender the should be. Eight, why Chapter 1 is revolutionary. Before Cervantes, heroes were often fixed types: the brave knight, the wise king, the faithful lover. Cervantes gives us something new, a character whose inner life shapes reality. This is modern narrative, a world filtered through consciousness. Don Quixote is not merely acting in a story. He is generating the story through his perception. That is why Chapter 1 is not only an introduction. It is the manifesto of the modern novel. End of expert explanation, Chapter 1. If you enjoyed this first chapter of Don Quixote, let me know in the comments. And if you want me to continue, I'll create Chapter 2 next. Read in English with the same voice and format. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. Until then, thank you for listening.